Wow, I haven't been called amazing for a while. It's pretty cool. So I'm John Madison. I work at this company called Fortinet. Has anyone heard of Fortinet? Everyone. I like that. As the CMO, I like that. Anybody a Fortinet customer? Oh, half as well. Reseller, just as important. Anybody a Fortinet competitor in here? I know you're in here. Show yourself. That's all good. All right, so for those who don't know me, I've been at Fortinet about 11 years. And before that, a company called Trend Micro for 10 years. So 20 long years of cybersecurity. And it's changed quite a bit over those years. By the way, I'm a very informal speaker, and so I encourage questions as we go along. Smart questions, of course. But so please, just put your hand up and ask questions as we go along. And so this presentation actually talks about this convergence or collision, or whatever you want to call it, between what I call networking and IT and CIOs and the cybersecurity world, which we're experiencing here at RSA, and the CISO, you know, what's changed. And as I said, I've been in 21 years in cybersecurity. The three things that drive cybersecurity. One is the infrastructure revolution. Two is the threat landscape. And three is regulatory. And if you go back maybe 10, 15 years, it was really the threat landscape that was changing a lot. Over the last 10 years, the infrastructure changes, you know, cloud and OT and IoT has been changing. But I think right now in our industry, it's very dynamic because all three are changing a lot, including regulatory and compliance through the governments. And so this is driving a lot of change inside the industry, which is good if you're in this industry. A bit challenging sometimes if you're having to defend against the attacks with all the infrastructure changes. Okay. So I'm not going to read this. I'm not sure if that's something about all the information here. By the way, all this information is public. So take what you want, take pictures, quote, whatever you need to do. And so three topics I'm going to talk about. One is what we call the secure networking. This is bringing networking and security together. Traditionally, networks are built and then you put some security on top or wherever you want to put it. In the future, you build both together. The second is a topic I think a lot of people are talking about, which is a platform or consolidation. And the third topic is what we call operational technology security or cyber physical security. And this is probably new. And over the last 5 years, I think the pandemic, COVID, accelerated this, giving remote access to OT environments and the traditional air gap disappearing. But it's, when you go forward and you think of OT, some people think about, oh, here's a manufacturing plant, or here's a energy or utility. In the future, everywhere will be OT. And so Fortinet's headquartered about an hour south of here, depending on the traffic, sometimes 2 hours, in Sunnyvale, Silicon Valley. And we completed, towards the end of last year, our new headquarters. And we made it emission-free, carbon neutral. And to do that, we put a lot of technology in there. The blinds move around, and the windows open, and there's cooling fans. It's all connected to the cloud. So that is an OT environment already. So you may think that OT is just for specific verticals and industries. OT will be everywhere long term. Okay, so this is the markets which we think are converging. If you go back maybe 15 years, it really was networking was separate. You have separate networking vendors, and then you have the cybersecurity vendors who are mainly software or agent-based. And over the years, these started to converge. And right now, it's a huge industry. Because as you take networking and bring it inside cybersecurity, and you add those OT environments, it's almost a $300 billion marketplace. And most importantly for us is that by 2030, secure networking will be larger than networking, which was hard to predict when we started our company maybe 23 years ago. So secure networking, firewalling, SD-WAN, zero trust, our favorite term, SASE, all these things will be larger than pure IP routing, switching, and access points, which is a big statement. Now looking at the threat landscape, I think 25,000 CVEs last year, 220,000 and counting now. So that attack surface is not getting any smaller. You couldn't have missed ChatGPT and AI these days. I think passwords can be cracked now within, most passwords which are just letters can be cracked in 20 seconds. And the ever-increasing attacks on the supply chain. They don't want to get caught out by the 3CX, which is the VoIP technology sitting on your Windows PC. Almost every quarter there's a supply chain attack. And there's all the geopolitics going on, the threat landscape, and you can talk for another 2 hours about the threat landscape, not trying to scare anyone. It's just going to be continually changing and moving. The other piece, though, is what I call the infrastructure changes. And this is most recent. And so most customers have been moving some applications to the cloud. This will continue. I see some customers now, more advanced customers, moving applications to edge compute. So this application journey will continue. It won't stop. And right now, I think I have 30% of my people back in the office, trying to push it to 50% at some point. So this work from anywhere is continually changing. And as I said, this piece of OT now connected to the cloud, has to be connected, is making sure that all these devices are on as well. And what customers have been doing is adding lots of things, lots of shiny objects called cybersecurity networking companies. And each time there's a problem in the threat landscape, or each time the infrastructure changes, or regulatory compliance, they add a new shiny object. And it's becoming very, very complex to manage all these different vendors, all these different products, and move more quickly into the digital age. All right, let's start with secure networking journey. I think I talked a bit about this. This is a pretty stunning slide in terms of traditional networking versus secure networking. Secure networking by 2030, using some of our beloved Gartner information, will be larger than networking. It's already about 40% today, which is, sorry? Let's define terms. Yeah, so I'm going to define the terms in a minute. Yes. So the question was, define secure networking and networking, I think. And I've got a definition here coming up. But let me first talk about why. So if you think about networking, it hasn't really changed at all, maybe in the last 25 years. It's just got faster, okay? So I've got faster switches, faster access points, faster routers, but it still trusts everything. It just wants to connect you. It doesn't really care who you are, where you are, what you're trying to connect to, what you're trying to send, etc. So it's a very trustworthy networking. Long term, we need to move to this more of a zero trust approach, where we need to understand who you are, where you are, what content, what application you're using. A bit further out, also contextual, why, when, which. And so to do that, you need a lot more processing power. Okay, you need to check all these things. It's not just saying, I'll check the IP address and off you go. You've got all these things to check. And that's why secure networking, and I'll define it in a minute, is much more sophisticated from a compute perspective. And let's define secure networking. So networking, familiar, routing, switching, access points. Everyone's familiar with that. These are the secure networking capabilities. The very first one that came about was network firewall, next generation firewall, that looked at the content, that looked at the applications, for example. Even looks at devices these days and users. Then you've got SD-WAN. Everyone thought SD-WAN, it's just replacing routing. But there's application updates that are very important to SD-WAN to make sure you can do the steering correctly. And then the more recent ones are SASE, Zero Trust, SSE. And then from an OT perspective, secure switching, secure Wi-Fi. So that's how I define secure networking. It's any networking technology that gets a security update to make sure it can process the connection more securely. That work for you? Good. And all our customers are on this, what I call this journey. And all the people have started with firewalling and then have moved most recently to SD-WAN, SD-Branch, where you provide Wi-Fi and switching and 5G. And then as you go forward, SASE and Zero Trust. But all these things are journeys. And actually, each one of these is still a journey. So there's still a firewall journey, there's still an SD-WAN journey going on, but there's also a journey across these different marketplaces. And eventually, all of these will be working together under a single console. So let's go back to our first journey, our first piece here, which is the firewall. The firewalls traditionally, if you go back even 5 years ago, use cases were pretty standard. You'd put a firewall at the edge in the data center, or the perimeter, whatever you want to call it, and that would process the internet traffic. Then you would put a firewall in the core, we call a segmentation firewall, and that would keep everything separate. And those were the two use cases, up until 5 years ago, most people would deploy. Well, what's happened is applications have spread, and people are everywhere, and devices are connecting, is now the use cases for firewalling is spread as well. In fact, I'll just show you a slide after this. It's about 11 to 12 different use cases now for firewalling. So a lot of people said, oh, traditional firewalling is going to slow down and go away because we're moving to the cloud. Just the opposite has happened, but it's become more distributed. Okay? So now you have a distributed firewall at a campus or a branch. You have a rugged firewall in an OT environment. You have firewall as a service, virtual firewall, cloud-native firewall. So all these use cases now mean that you have to be very careful when you're selecting your firewall architecture. I spoke to a customer, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks ago, and I asked them how many firewall vendors they have, and they were pretty definite. I've got 2. I've got one in the data center and one in the cloud. And I went through each one of these use cases. They had 9 different firewalls vendors. 9 different consoles, 9 different policies, 9 different places to have visibility. And so, again, we're not saying that you have to be one, but you can't be 9 firewalls. That's out of control. And each of these marketplaces, this is a Gartner slide in terms of the size, these 11 use cases or 12 use cases are different in size, but different in growth as well. One thing that we do especially is look at for the appliance. If you go back to this slide, sorry. Not this slide, this slide. Each one of these use cases has a different deployment form factor. So some are appliances, some are virtual machine, some are as a service, some are cloud native, some are containerized. So not only do you need to have that functionality, but you need to be able to deploy it in all these different form factors. Now, one of the form factors that we still think is very important is appliances. Appliances is still 93% of all firewall deployments, especially at the internet edge. And what we use, we're one of the few companies that uses ASIC technology. Everyone familiar with ASIC technology? Crypto mining, use ASIC technology, all these specialized applications, because it's much more efficient, both in terms of performance, but also in terms of power efficiency. I'm starting to get, over the last 12 months, CIOs and CISOs ask me about our power consumption, because they're getting asked by their boards about how much power the IT department is using. So we're starting to see, we actually put on our data sheets our power consumption of our systems. Not many people do, but that's going to be a factor going forward as well. Right, the next part of the journey customers have gone on is SD-WAN. Has anyone implemented SD-WAN here, in there? Yeah, about 30%. That's about the same across our customer install base. We'd put SD-WAN straight into our firewalls, which you just switch it on. We don't really know how many of our customers have switched it on. We think it's a fundamental technology for everybody. Because once you've got that SD-WAN in place, really users and devices can go wherever they want. All your applications can keep on their journey, and the SD-WAN steering just takes care of it. So SD-WANs are people just think about SD-WAN as being, oh, it's high availability or low cost of WAN interconnections. It's a long-term technology to make sure you have that digital experience between your users, devices, and applications. And then we've seen an extension of that, especially in the branch, but and also in the campus as we go forward, especially as I mentioned about those OT environments, is adding secure Wi-Fi, secure switching, and actually quite a few customers now investigating secure 5G as this SD branch technology. Now you notice that the console is still the same as I'm going through this journey, and also the applications are still the same. And that's going to be very important as you go forward, because this single vendor SASE, as Gartner's calling it, I don't know if anyone heard that terminology, a single console, a single security system that updates all the components. Otherwise, you just keep adding consoles and security updates. So the next piece is your favorite word, SASE. I thought it might go away, but it's going to be here for a long time. Your Secure Access Services Edge. Basically what that does is saying, it doesn't matter if you're a remote user, you're on campus, you're in a branch, it doesn't matter where you're trying to go, internet, SaaS, private access, that these components of SASE, whether they be on-premise, in the cloud, as a service, provide that security and that connectivity. This is going to be a hot topic, I think, towards the end of this year, because up until now, companies have selected a different vendor for each one of those SASE components. Oh, I'll have someone doing Zero Trust. Oh, somebody else can do my SD-WAN. Somebody else can do my firewalling. It's all good. We'll try and make it work together. It's really hard. So what's going to happen going forward is what we call, or Gartner are calling it single vendor SASE, but universal SASE is a term we use as well, is that customers are going to start to look at all those different components and say, the only way to make this work properly, measure the digital experience, the security level, is to bring it into one console and one system and one operating system. And again, I think a lot of people have deployed SASE or Zero Trust or SSE, whatever you want to call it, and they deployed it quickly during COVID for remote access. And that was internet access and private access. And I think the trouble was, a lot of it was just cloud-based, which is fine. Sometimes it makes sense not to come back onto the network. If I'm here right now and I need to go to the internet, maybe I'll just stay off the network. Why do I go back on my network? If I'm in my building and I want to go to our data center, why go off my network? Why not just use SD-WAN to stay on the network? The most important thing going forward is that traffic can go between the two. So if I'm off the network and I need to do private application in my data center, SASE SSE will spin up an SD-WAN spoke right into my network, and that's the most efficient, the most effective way to do it. If I need to go to a SaaS application on the campus, maybe I'll just go off the network. So this interchange between SSE and SASE and SD-WAN is going to be extremely important to go forward, because that's the most efficient way to do things. It really says that we're going to be, as I said right at the beginning, this hybrid world for a long time. Okay? Sometimes it makes sense to be off the network, sometimes it makes sense to be on, and vice versa. And that's going to be the key technology going forward between SASE, is making sure that console can do that. Again, same console, same security suite. And then the other piece, and I'm not going to call this the final piece, because you can start Zero Trust today. Has anyone implemented Zero Trust technology today? Oh, brave soul over there. Oh, 2, 3, you're all coming out now, 4. Because it's the hardest to do. Fortinet as a company, and maybe I shouldn't say this publicly, but we've been on a 2-year journey implementing Zero Trust across our network. Application by application, user by user. And anyone who says they've just switched Zero Trust on and it's working for every application, wherever it may be, for every user, doesn't understand Zero Trust. It's complex, but it's very worthwhile getting there. But again, it's a journey, and you don't have to get there straight away. We focused on some of our most important applications first, like our source code for our developers, or some of our confidential information in our financial systems. Because once you take out that important data and applications, your security posture improves dramatically. Take your 10 top applications and data, put those in a Zero Trust implementation, and you have dramatically improved your security posture. Now you can keep on that journey and keep going. I think we've got another couple of applications to do, but Zero Trust is definitely a journey, but you've got to think very carefully about the architecture, because you're not really sure exactly where the applications will be in the future or where your users will be. So if you take a cloud-only approach, that's going to be very limited. Yes, in some instances, like SASE, cloud is going to be the best way to do it. But sometimes you might want to put it inside your data center, like we did for our source code. Sometimes you want to implement that Zero Trust on the campus, because that's where the edge compute is, or the applications. So again, when I come back to this journey across all these things, it's definitely a journey that's starting with firewall and going to Zero Trust, but each one of those have their own journey as well as you roll out those use cases. And again, you can see here, probably it's a bit small for those at the back, but the Zero Trust that needs an agent and a proxy. Proxy enforcement, you need flexibility where you put that. It could be in the cloud, but it could be in the data center, it could be on-premise, it could be in the factory. All right, let me stop there and see if I've got any questions about that secure networking journey. No? Any Fortinet salespeople in here? No? Okay, so it's good, because our Fortinet salespeople are not the brightest. Okay, so by any means. And so this is how I explained it to our Fortinet sales team. This is before convergence, okay? We used to have a phone, an alarm clock, an MP3 player, and this is after convergence. And they get it, just like that. All right, let's go to the next piece, which is the cybersecurity platform. I think a lot of people are talking about this consolidation and platform approach. And I spoke to one customer maybe 2 years ago. They had 80 different cybersecurity technologies. 80. I couldn't even name 80. I might walk around RSA a bit, maybe I could name 80. That's a lot. But on average, I think, maybe 20 is the average. How many people have 20 cybersecurity products here? 10? Oh, what about 50? So I think the average I find is about 20 to 25 different products. And again, they sometimes don't count different implementations and different form factors. And I think everyone I speak to, though, and this is a Gartner stat again, every one of them wants to get to this consolidation, and that they can't get to a point where they make it all work well together. And Gartner referred to it as this cybersecurity mesh. There's fabrics, we call it fabrics, there's platforms, there's all different names for it, but it's basically saying, let's try and make things work better together. We released a survey yesterday. It was a ransomware survey. And one of the questions was, how prepared are you for ransomware? And what happened when you were attacked? So 75% said they had best-of-breed ransomware protection sitting in the network, sitting in their endpoints and applications. And 50% of those actually failed to stop the ransomware attack. They found it in one place, but they still couldn't stop it from spreading inside the network. And so the key going forward is, and I've seen this balance because a lot of people say, oh, I've got to have best of breed and these specific features for everything I do. The most important thing going forward is to make these things work better together. So again, it's not saying, well, let's just go to one vendor. That's not going to work. It's saying, instead of having 20 individual point products, let's select maybe 5, 7, 8 platforms that maybe don't have all the features of that point product, but actually work together and communicate. So if I find something in our email, I can immediately tell my endpoints, have you seen this file? I can immediately tell my firewall, have you seen this? The fabric allows you to communicate and make sure that when you find things, you look in other places, and straight away you put those controls in place. Now, unfortunately, the cybersecurity industry, even though we're all friends here at RSA, are not the best at working together. Not best at publishing APIs, policy, content, threat intelligence. It's kind of left to the customer to try and do that. So in some ways, the industry really needs to improve on making sure that these APIs are available. We publish all our APIs. But what you're trying to do eventually here is take your cybersecurity framework. Some people use NIST, some people use ISO, MITRE, there's different frameworks. You look across that, protect and detect, respond, recover, identify, and you have your different products and these different pieces. There's still a lot of money spent on protection, fair enough. You want to try and stop things before they get in. A lot more money these days is spent on detection. A lot more money should be spent on response. But the key across all these things, this life cycle, is making sure they all communicate. Like I said, that the endpoint can talk to the network can talk to the cloud, that it all can be coordinated from an automation system through your playbooks in SOAR or inside your SOC. So that's the key on the platform. It's not saying, well, we're a big vendor here. Well, I'm going to say that in a minute, but it's not saying you're just a big vendor and everyone needs to buy from us, because that doesn't work sometimes. You've seen that with certain vendors. What it's saying is select platforms that work together. But those platforms need to be open, okay? And so whether it's industry standards, again, there's not that many, whether it be vendor standards, vendor specific, or even communities. So again, when you look inside, there are some standards, but they're very high level standards. A lot of the event logs from syslog are used, but there's not industry standards around an endpoint communicating to a zero trust policy engine. There's none. It's vendor specific, okay? And then as you go forward, there are some of the big vendors, because they're so big, they do have some standards, but I wish they would publish more APIs and make them available. And then obviously communities, which allow you to take things. Now this is a slide that I sometimes don't put, it's in this deck. I don't put it up because Gartner could get mad. So please, no photographs of this one. Just keep it to yourself. It's just us, okay, here, nobody else. I know if we get, look at this guy here taking a photograph already. Look at him. I'm only joking, you can take a photograph. So one analogy I've used is that if you're a consolidator, you can't be just a point product. If you're going to consolidate, you need to have presence across the entire spectrum. And I worked out there's about 11 Gartner Magic Quadrants that really are cybersecurity. There's other ones in networking and energy and other things, but about 11 Magic Quadrants. Our feelings are if you've got maybe 5 or 6 Magic Quadrants, you've got at least a starting point to be able to become a platform, a consolidator. If you've got 4, you could maybe get there. I call them the pretenders. There's a lot of people who have 2 from a legacy. There is a lot of people with 1 and people with none. And so I put this chart together, and these are all the Magic Quadrants: endpoint security, network security, SIEM, access management, SD-WAN, secure SD-WAN, wireless LAN, secure wireless LAN, privileged access management, application testing, and unified endpoint management, and WAF. Okay? And then I plugged in, this took me hours to do, I plugged in all the different vendors in the Magic Quadrant there, and I came up with this. So I think we have 8, I think it's in there. Microsoft 6, Cisco 6, Broadcom 5, Palo Alto 4, Huawei. And then if you actually extend that out, this took even longer. Then there's hundreds of vendors with 1, or hundreds of vendors with none. So I'm not saying that the vendors at the top there will be the consolidators long term, but they've got a better chance than a lot of other vendors there. And so I think you've got to make sure when you look at a long-term platform, you've got to invest though. So it's no good being a vendor that's not investing, etc. But you've got to look at it realistically. You will need some point product solutions there as well, and some small ones. But the consolidators need to have that breadth across the entire attack surface. Oh, back to my sales slide. This is the analogy of a platform approach. Everything just works. My watch works with my Mac and my iPhone. I don't do anything. It just communicates and automates and updates. That's what you're looking for inside a platform. That when you find something, it tells everything else. It shares the threat intelligence. It shares the control points. It shares the updates of IPS, AV, et cetera, across the entire infrastructure without you doing anything. Because humans are not able to respond to the speed of the attacks going on. All right, enough of platforms. Let's move on to operational technology aware. Here's the issue with the OT environments, okay? I mean, they're great environments. They're very sophisticated in some ways from a physical point of view. Anyone recognize this? The Purdue model of operational technology, cyber-physical, starting with at the very lowest level, controllers and zones, operational control, all the way through the integrated IT. The issue is that all our cybersecurity systems and networking systems are not OT aware. Okay? So your networking gear, a traditional networking gear inside an OT in a factory has no clue about what the device is attached to it. It's just connecting it. The same for access points. So the first thing you need to do is make sure all your networking gear is secure, that it understands what's connected. It can apply IPS signatures per port or per bandwidth. The number one infection vector for OT environments is the supply chain. I must have spoken to 10, 15 different customers who have been infected through their supply chain because of remote access. Everyone comes in remotely now. I had one very large manufacturer, he has over 1,000 vendors coming into the network every day, updating the systems and changing the systems. They have no clue how secure those things are. And so the access, the ability to do privileged access, to do zero trust, is going to become paramount as you go forward in an OT environment. And then you look at your IT systems, your SIM, a lot of them have no clue what a log looks like coming from a controller. It wouldn't know the difference. So all your IT systems need to include OT modules so it can understand what's coming from an endpoint perspective, from a SOAR, from a SIM, et cetera, et cetera. And then you need a really strong ecosystem because no one vendor understands the very fragmented nature of all these industries and these verticals and all the machinery inside there. It's impossible. You're still going to need an ecosystem to be able to provide some of that visibility. This is one of the fastest growing areas in cybersecurity. It's very important to start locking it down and securing it. We're seeing as companies build new factories or new utility, they're putting OT and they're building it straight in to that cyber-physical world from day one. Okay? All right, how am I doing on time? Pretty good, pretty good. We can maybe get some questions in. And then I'll leave you with this slide. This is the kind of, this RSA said you can't have everything specific to Fortinet. This is just Fortinet. Thank you for being customers or thinking about being customers. We're actually the third largest cybersecurity company in terms of revenue and billings. We're actually the largest in terms of shipments, in terms of customers. Based in Silicon Valley, we're a North American company. Actually, we have more engineers in Canada than the US. Again, really focused on making sure that networking and cybersecurity come together. Okay, all right. Let me leave it there and see if I've got any cunning questions that can stump me. Hey, one over here. You can either use, there's a mic here or you can shout really loud. Okay. Oh, wait. You have to shout a bit louder than that. So. So when you say SDP, so the question is, my model didn't mention SDP. Are you referring to software-defined perimeter? Yeah. Yeah, I think that's just inside the agent. That's another component as well. I couldn't list everything. There's, you know, as you know, there's probably, we have 55 different products. Cybersecurity, I think, is about 80, so I didn't list everything inside there, but that's another important point. What I was saying is it's becoming very distributed. So these perimeters now exist at your branch edge. They exist at your home. They exist in the factory. They exist in the cloud and the data center. So you're going to need different technologies, and SDP is one of them, to provide that protection of the perimeter. There's a question at the back here.
So you mentioned the integrations with other vendors. You mentioned the integrations with other vendors and how that's going to be key to try and consolidate. As a vendor, are you actively trying to partner with others, trying to form those connectors?
Absolutely. We have 350 partners in our ecosystem and counting. And also some of those are our competitors, to be honest, as well. Because if I'm a customer, I'm not going to say, oh, everything can get taken out now and I'll just update everything with your gear. It takes a while. So you absolutely need an open API. We sometimes build connectors to other vendors as well. So we're actively recruiting partners all the time. No more questions? Seems like. In that case, thank you for your time.